has penned a number of notable books on race, politics, and philosophy, including most recently the New York Times bestseller, Democracy Matters. Dr. West tonight on the legacy of Dr. King and the relevance of his message in the 21st century and more. We're glad you've joined us. Dr. Cornel West is coming up right now.
Tavis Smiley is made possible in part by Toyota, makers of the all-new 2007 Toyota Camry.
Tavis Smiley is sponsored in part by Walmart. Walmart strives to be a valued member of the communities we serve by providing a range of employment opportunities, from hourly jobs to salaried careers, and by donating to charities that address community concerns.
Casey Foundation, helping to build better futures for America's kids and families.
And by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
I am always pleased and honored to welcome Dr. Cornel West to this program. He is one of America's great thinkers, and I believe America's leading public intellectual. He is, of course, a distinguished professor of religion at Princeton. His many notable books include Keeping Faith, Race Matters, and most recently, the New York Times bestseller, now out in paperback, Democracy Matters. Next week in New Orleans, I suspect among other places, he'll be a speaker at the annual Martin Luther King Jr. Week for Peace. Dr. West, as always, what a pleasure to have you on this program.
What a blessing for me, though, brother.
Glad to have you here. I assume your schedule is like mine. You must get really busy around this time of the year.
Oh, yes. No, indeed. A lot of black folk running around trying to keep the bloodstained banner alive in the name of justice, my brother.
Yeah.
When
you think of Dr. King, what is for you his enduring legacy? The enduring legacy?
Well, that's a deep question, but let me begin by this, though, brother. I think that when it comes to mass media, this particular show enacts the legacy, because what you have been able to do, Tavis, and the reason why I believe you're the most brilliant talk show host on television is that you bring together high-quality Socratic questioning with highly mature, active listening. So when you fuse critical intelligence with empathy, and that's Martin. It's Socratic and prophetic with a democratic end, which is to say you respect each and every person as one made in the image of God, equal before the law, but an everyday person. And in your exchange, you respect them enough to listen, and then in your utterance, you take them serious enough to challenge them. But you see, Brother Martin was really about the fusion of the Socratic and the prophetic with democratic ends. Mm-hmm. And so that particular legacy, I think, is found in a variety of different contexts. But when it comes to a market-driven mass media, it's a rare thing to find that kind of Socratic questioning and the active listening, which is an example of a certain kind of empathy.
You're kind. I appreciate that.
No, I mean, I think it's very important because, you see, a lot of chit-chat about Martin every year. And Martin has been so domesticated and tamed and defamed, you know, what we call the Santa Clausification of the brother.
Wait, hold the phone. The Santa Clausification of Dr. King.
Yeah.
Which means what, Dr. West?
He just becomes a nice little old man with a smile with toys in his bag, not a threat to anybody, as if his fundamental commitment to unconditional love and unarmed truth does not bring to bear a certain kind of pressure to a status quo. So the status quo feels so comfortable. So it's a convenient thing to do rather than acknowledge him as to what he was, which is what the FBI said, the most dangerous man in America. Why? Because of his fundamental commitment to love and to justice and trying to keep track of the humanity of each and every one of us.
Talking to you, it's kind of like talking to Dr. Angelo, who comes here often, and we move around and cover so much territory. So let me do the same thing with you, obviously.
Yeah.
Let me jump forward, and then we'll come back again. When you talk about the Santa Clausification, right? Santa Clausification of, I got to wrestle with that. The Santa Clausification of Dr. King. Could the same thing be said in a contemporary sense of a guy named Nelson Mandela?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, when I was there and spoke at his birthday celebration, I talked about the Santa Claus vacation, Nelson Mandela. What happens is, again, in the market-driven world in which celebrity status operates in such a way that it tries to diffuse all of the threat and to sugarcoat and deodorize what actually is rather funky, and we say that in the name of James Brown.
Yeah.
The legacy of James Brown, right? That we have to be clear that when we're talking about towering freedom fighters like a Nelson Mandela or a James Brown, I'll say the same thing about Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel and others. These folk are such powerful forces that are threats to powers that be. Of course, Jesus is a grand example. I speak as a Christian, you see. And of course, we've seen Jesus been Santa Clausified for the last 2,000 years.
But certainly during the Christmas season.
Oh, Lord.
Yeah.
Deodorized, manicured, sterilized, and yet there's the blood constituting major threat. Why? Because love and justice is a serious thing in a world that's obsessed with fear, hatred, and greed. And that's very much what we're talking about. And I think for you and I, though, Tavis, Brother Martin, of course, we dedicate our lives to making the world safe for his legacy. It's just a question of what does it really mean to be a free human being, and specifically, what does it mean to be a free black man who musters the courage to both love, beginning with himself, and others who look like him, and others who don't look like him, because he's a humanist, he's a universalist, right? But he also knows that he must confront America. You see, I mean, one way of characterizing Martin is he's a free Negro who resists niggerization. Because
wait, hold on.
A nigger is an American invention to
Right.
make sure these human beings are intimidated, scared, divided, distrustful of one another, feeling powerless, feeling impotent, feeling that they can never fundamentally make a difference. That's what a nigger is. It was invented in America. In fact, Abe Lincoln himself has this little line in his journal of February 1859 in his lecture on invention, the invention of the Negro, 15th century, 1434.
This is Lincoln.
I mean, this is Abe Lincoln. Lincoln is honest.
Yeah. Speak to the
He's
fact
an honest brother.
Speak to the fact that this construct was created.
Absolutely. And Martin says, I'm a self-loving Negro who resists niggerization. I'm a free black man who resists dehumanization. Of course, the invention of niggers was grounded in what? White fear, white hatred, and white greed. And so Martin has to say, you know what? I refuse to be fearful. I refuse to hate back. And I refuse to be greedy. Instead of the fear, I'm going to enact a what? A boldness. Instead of the hatred, I'm going to enact what? A love. Instead of the greed, I'm going to enact what? A giving. And not just any giving, but the highest form of giving, which is forgiving. He's even forgiving Bull O'Connor and others. What a rich legacy. Anytime we mention that brother's name, we ought to shudder, brother. Because that's the kind of challenge he presents to us and to each one of us, no matter what color, creed, sexual orientation, gender, and so on.
One of the things that worries me, and you and I are both on the lecture circuit ad nauseum during this time of the year, King's birthday all the way through the end of Black History Month. You on the road all the time, but certainly this time of the year is a busy period for anybody black on the lecture circuit. I'm always concerned about the fact that I think Martin's the greatest American we've ever produced. I've told you that before.
Absolutely.
But I also fear, to the contrary, that when we raise certain black heroes and heroines so high, almost to the level of deity, that it says to young people that you can't appropriate their courage, that you can't do, that you can't be, because Martin was so special, Rosa was so special, Harriet was so special, that we somehow suggest to them, although maybe unwittingly, that they're so special that you can't be that person. Now, I raise that only because, one, I want your thought, whether you agree or disagree on that. But the second reason why I raise it is because I wonder then what it means for everyday people, as Sly Stone would say, what it means for everyday people to be free in the world that we live today. What does it mean to fundamentally be a free human being, say nothing of a black American?
Yeah, now, brother, you raised a number of crucial questions. And let me first start by trying to respond to what you said regarding Martin being put on a pedestal. Because Martin was a human being. You know, he's a featherless, two-legged, linguistically conscious creature born within urine and feces like everybody else, right? And he died, just like us, vanishing creature, at least in flesh and blood. Now, what does that mean? It means then that he's part of a tradition. He's not some isolated icon, because all human beings are dependent on mama for 9 months at least, and then loved ones, and then networks and schools, temples, churches, synagogues, apprenticeship networks, and so forth. So that Martin, in that way, in the language of Robert Moses, he's more a wave in an ocean than he is an isolated icon. And a lot of our young people see Martin as just an item in a museum rather than part of a vital and vibrant tradition, part of an ocean. So there's no Martin without his mama, his grandmama, his professors at Morehouse and Crozer Theological Seminary and Boston University. Same is true for yourself, same is true for myself, and so on, right? So then the question becomes, what do then I tell young people? What do I tell my son, Clifton? What do I tell my daughter, Zaytun? I say, he was a human being who mustered incredible courage to think for himself, free, against the grain.
That's first thing. That's first thing. Thinking for yourself.
You have to be able to think for yourself. You have to be able to cut against the grain, get the distance from your peer group. And not only that, but you have to have an habitual vision of greatness. You see, you have to believe in fact that you will refuse to settle for mediocrity. You won't confuse financial security with your personal integrity. You won't confuse your success with your greatness or your prosperity with your magnanimity. If you have a vision of greatness, there's something that's luring you all the time for something grander than you. And of course, as a Christian, for me, he who is greatest among us will be
your servant.
Your servant, the quality of your service to others. Do you find joy in your service to others? Do you actually believe, in fact, that living is connected to giving? Now, maybe some people may not opt for that. Say, no, I'm the hedonistic, narcissistic, individualistic type, and that's just a lot of abstract rhetoric. That's right. I'm not into that kind of stuff. I say, that's fine. That's fine. I choose to attempt to pursue this road. I'll fall on my face. We all do. Cracked vessels, right? Crooked heart, crooked neighbor. How the crooked heart going to learn how to love the crooked neighbor? That's part of the challenge for those of us locked into a certain Christian tradition. But we Christians have no monopoly on truth, no monopoly on goodness, and so forth and so on. We believe Jesus Christ is the truth, but we also know, in fact, that a variety of religious traditions have some things to say that we can learn. And therefore, especially as citizens in a democratic society, we're going to have equality of person before the law, no matter what religious or non-religious views they have.
Let me go back, though. You make this distinction I want to give you, or give myself a chance to catch up with. This distinction between success and greatness. You went right past that. It's a profound distinction. Talk to me about the distinction, the difference between success and greatness.
No, I think success is worldly in terms of the American dream is often characterized as pecuniary gain and financial prosperity, economic status. You know, living in the big crib, you know, in the vanilla suburb, living large, and the bling bling that goes along with it. Now, we all know we all need money, we all need financial resources and so forth, but we also know how that can easily become not just idolatrous, but it can become poisonous to one's soul. You know, the wonderful essay written by the white literary bluesman Tennessee Williams after the Glass Menagerie in 1947 wrote a fascinating essay called The Catastrophe of Success. It's actually a biography of Frank Capra, which is a very negative biography. I didn't like it, but I like Capra, but it did reveal some things. But it was also titled The Catastrophe of Success. Meaning what? That if, in fact, you're not spiritually, politically, morally prepared to deal with success, then a catastrophe can follow thereafter, and in fact, it can blind you in your own quest for greatness. Because if, in fact, all you actually think life is about are these fleeting pleasures and these commodities, and you think you can possess your soul by means of possessing commodities, you've got some nihilism, some existential emptiness, and spiritual malnutrition waiting for you. I don't care where it is. I know we here in Hollywood, so maybe I should shout that out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But Hollywood doesn't suffer from it in any disproportionate way. It's also among the destitute, because the destitute have a fetishism of commodities, the fetishism of success. All I need is success, and then somehow I'm a better person, I'm more human, people will accept me, even though I don't have it. Well, that's just as bad as achieving the success and discovering you're living in the mansion all by yourself, alone, unable to make any kind of qualitative relation to anybody.
Let me, again, so much to talk about. Let me just throw a few names at you. We were off the air for a couple of weeks at the end of the year, and one of the things that just troubled my spirit at the end of the year, specifically, but as I look back on last year, we lost some greats, certainly in the we lost a lot of greats. But while I have you here, as one who's learned it in African American studies and teaches it, let me just throw a few names at you, if I can, of some greats that we lost last year as we start this year, and just get your quick take on a few of them in no particular order. What a tragedy it was at 40 years of age to lose Gerald Levert.
Great Gerald Levert, though, brother, the greatest soul singer of his generation, though. You listen to good stuff, and you listen to Pop, Pop, Pop Goes My Mind and Casanova, written by Reggie. And Gerald himself, of course, wrote some of those beautiful songs. I think Season will be a classic and will remain a classic forever. And, of course, we salute Brother Eddie Levert, his blessed family. But Gerald, and he was my dear friend. We were on his album, and he's on my album forthcoming. I just thank God he was around for 40 years, but oh, we miss him so much, though, man. I'm telling you.
Lou Rawls.
Good God. Yeah, Lou coming out of Soul Stirrers, replacing the inimitable Sam Cooke. He had a voice that was so incandescent. It reminded you a little bit of Nat King Cole in terms of the precision of his pronunciation of words and so forth. But he was so suave and so cool. And, you know, Rawls had what, you know, the great black musicians and the black preachers has, which is the elegance of earned self-togetherness. It's a wonderful phrase that Albert Murray uses in his book, Stompin' the Blues. The elegance of earned self-togetherness. Now that means that you, James would say, staying in the show enough. You've got a self-confidence. You've got an elegance about you. You have a sense of being able to persevere whatever the circumstances are, but do it with dignity, with grace, not putting others down. You see, Lou Rawls had that, and of course, again, that's part of a tradition.
Speaking of staying in the show enough,
yeah,
James Brown.
James, brother. Like Thomas Harding, the greatest poet, novelist, the English language in modern times, they both were born dead. Both of them pronounced, presumed dead when they were born. That's James.
James Brown, born, still
May
born.
3rd, 1933, in Barnwell, South Carolina. And if it wasn't for his Aunt Minnie, who breathed the breath into him, his father Joe was crying, his mother Susie crying, Aunt Minnie breathing the breath into James, and then that cry. Yeah. And yeah, he was crying ever since. Yeah. Screaming ever since with his genius. James, nobody like him, no brother. He brought the funk, and what did he do? He taught us that there's sublime beauty in the funk. There's a deep love in the funk. There's a dangerous freedom in the funk if you're willing to get down there and wrestle with it. And of course, that meant what? He had to be himself. And it takes tremendous courage to be yourself. Tremendous. In fact, in some ways, it takes more courage to be yourself, to look closely at the dark corners of your own soul than it does for a soldier to fight on the battlefield, little brother.
You can't talk about Martin as we approach this holiday without talking about Coretta.
Yeah, man.
Coretta Scott King.
What a profound love she had, not just for Brother Martin Luther King Jr., but for all humanity, for her blessed children, and what level of dignity and grace she enacted decade after decade after decade. Not just out of her loyalty to Martin, but she and Martin were wedded to something bigger than both of them, which was a vision for a better humanity. And of course, we cannot downplay their Christian faith. A vision of a kingdom that would keep track of the better angels of their nature as they made their trek from womb to tomb.
At the beginning of the year, we spend an inordinate amount of time in the media conducting conversations that are essentially about trying to empower people to figure it out so they can get it right.
Yeah.
I mean, if a new year presents any, I mean, we use that phrase all the time, a new year is an opportunity for a new you.
Yeah.
But how do you go about figuring it out? That is to say, what your purpose, what your calling, what your vocation is. How do you go about figuring it out so that you can take advantage of this year that you've been blessed with to get it right?
Well, the gift of time is something, though. It's a precious thing. On the one hand, it tick, 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 tick. It's lost. On the other hand, it's possibility, possibility, possibility. And I think part of it has to do with trying to get just outside of oneself. I think part of our problem, Tavis, is that we live in such a market-driven world in which narcissistic frenzy and hedonistic fury is coming at us, and it seeps through every nook and cranny of who we are. So that I think one of the best ways of talking about resolutions is to try to connect it to some other folk. What are we going to do better for others? What are we going to do for God, for justice, for freedom, for equality? Something that will take us outside of ourselves, but at the same time we are involved in it. So we partake of something grander than us, but it doesn't erode or erase our individuality because we are participating in it in that way. And I think one thing, especially as it relates to your wonderful show, brothers, people just ought to try to be more critically informed. You see, so you think about the government, less involved in some serious critical reflection about not just the Bush administration, but the relation of corporate elites and the two parties themselves. What kinds of truths are being put forward? What kind of discussions are taking place? And then on the moral level, does it focus on working people? Does it focus on poor people? Where's our discussion on the prison-industrial complex? Where's our discussion on workers' wages and so forth and so on? I think that for me is something beyond just the individualistic conceptions of New Year's resolutions, and begins to connect us with something much larger. You know, how do you keep this fragile democratic experiment afloat? How does it relate to our imperial presence in Iraq and so forth and so on?
To that latter point, let me ask you right quick how it in fact does relate. How could we? And we heard what President Bush had to say earlier this week about his new way forward in Iraq. But how can we do a better job of being a member of this world community? It's a large question, but.
Well, I mean, one thing you have to do is you have to get off your high horse, you know, and do away with your arrogance and your hubris. You have to be honest about yourself. Dependence on oil and the role of oil companies on the one hand. You have to talk honestly about the relation between our conception of ourselves as a free nation and how other nations themselves are involved in their own attempts to be free, beginning with Latin America, with the Monroe Doctrine, where we treated Latin America like it was our backyard, doing anything we wanted to do and so forth and so on. But also being very, very honest about fairness. About fairness in the Middle East, Israeli-Palestinian conflict. How do we affirm our Jewish brothers and sisters and say Israel must have security, and we affirm our Palestinian brothers and sisters and say Palestinians must have justice? How do we bring together the security on the one hand, crucial given Jews as a despised and hated people for so long, and a justice for Palestinians? Why? Because they're human beings like anybody else. Does America have what it takes to have a discussion about that? We're just talking about a dialogue about that, you see. Well, those things require what? People willing to pay a price, bear a burden. Right? Now, if you think it's cost-free, if you think there's no price to be paid, then it's easy to slide back into conformity, complacency, and that goes hand in hand with our market-driven, narcissistic, hedonistic society, where more and more people are concerned just about getting over as opposed to being a better, more decent, compassionate human being.
Are you hopeful that this generation can get it right? You teach these minds every day.
Well, brother, I tell you, I'm a legatee of not just Martin Luther King Jr., but also Cliff and Irene West, but also John Coltrane and Anton Chekhov, which means I'm never optimistic. The evidence always looks underdetermined. But I am full of hope. I never give up on any human being, no matter what color, so forth, because I believe that they have potential. And in that sense, it's a kind of, blues-inflicted hope rather than a cheap American optimism that motivates me, my brother.
What a blessing to have him here just to talk. His latest book is the New York Times bestseller, now out in paperback, Democracy Matters. His name, of course, Cornel West. Dr. West, Happy New Year. Good
What
to see
a
you,
blessing,
man.
though.
Glad to have
Number
you.
4.
Yeah.
Congratulations there,
Thank
brother.
you. I appreciate it. Season 4.
Absolutely.
That's our show for tonight. Catch me on the weekends on PRI, Public Radio International. Our radio podcast available at TavisTalks.com. I'll see you back next time on PBS. Until then, good night from LA. Thanks for watching, and keep the faith.